Welcome to the Story Apothecary, a podcast filled with healing and medicinal stories. My name is Nana Tomova, and I'm a traditional storyteller and a pharmacist, and stories are medicines which I dispense. In this podcast, you'll find my prescriptions of stories for the body, mind, heart, soul, and for the earth. So I invite you to join me as we enter the healing world of stories together. Hi and welcome to July's story. I decided to tell this one because hedgehogs have been on my mind. We have hedgehogs, big ones and little ones, in the garden, running around, being very cute, and making all kind of strange noises. And it's lovely to see. And unfortunately, we don't have holes in the fence between the neighbours. There's solid stone walls, and so the hedgehogs have learned to use the side gate, and so they walk along the high street and go from high street to garden, from high street to garden. They even try to get into the post office. There we go. Hedgehogs in modern life. Today's story comes from the Baltic countries, from Lithuania. I hope you will enjoy its curiosity, its richness, and its magic. Here is the hedgehog and his bride. There was once an old man and an old woman who didn't have many riches. They had been together for a long time, and they had shared many good moments of laughter and joy, and some sad moments of tears and grief. They had met what life had thrown at them, and although they had wished to have children of their own, it was not meant to be. But they were as happy as they could be. They got on well, and they respected one another, which is more than many people get. The old man, he made a living making and selling brooms. He was very good at it. He would go into the forest and collect twigs, and he knew just the right season to collect them so they would be brittle enough to sweep, but not too brittle to break. All various sizes, and he would collect them and bind them together, and he was very successful. And with his living, they had enough coin, so that their bellies were always full. Now, one particular day in the forest, late summer, early autumn, he went to collect some twigs, just as he normally did. But on this particular day, or he heard it before he saw it, there was a nuzzling in the leaves, a crickling and a crackling, and out of nowhere, a hedgehog emerged. Now, a hedgehog in the forest is not a peculiar thing. It isn't a curious thing. Hedgehogs belong in the forest. But this particular hedgehog, backwards and forward he scurried and never left the man's side. The man thought, this is curious. He tried to give him a bit of food from his own lunch, and the hedgehog scooped it all up and ate it noisily. And you'd think that the hedgehog would go home and back to its den with its family. But the hedgehog didn't. He stood there by the man's foot, and whatever The man ate, the hedgehog bustled about his feet, still picking a bread here, a breadcrumb there, licking a drop of milk from the old man's boot. And the old man laughed. He took a liking to the animal. It was something about his eyes. He could almost see the world into it. There was something there. And, well, he didn't want to leave him. He put the animal in his cap and he brought him home. His wife greeted the animal. "What have you brought to us?" she said. "Company. So it won't just be the two of us, it will be three." And that night, under those old beams in the cottage, not two slept, but three, for the very first time. In the morning, as the old man and the old woman stretched their arms and looked around, they had to rub their eyes because the whole house had been washed, the plates had been scrubbed, set carefully upon the shelves, the pots and pans scrubbed themselves, they shone like silver. The floor swept clean and sprinkled with sand, the water was brought in, the firewood was chopped, it was stacked around, the fire was lit and crackling. And there was the hedgehog, sitting on a stool and snorting, busy at work sewing up the old man's pants with one of his own needles, which he picked from his bag. The old man and the old woman looked at each other, their eyes big like saucers. "We're so lucky," they said. "All these years, the heavens didn't give us a child, but look, in our old age, while our hands are not as nimble as they used to be, creaking and groaning and misshapen with old age, we have such a nimble and such a hard-working son. Let this hedgehog be our son," they said. The hedgehog, they named Prickly. And Prickly grew up and decided one day, he announced, years later, that he wanted to get married. Now Prickly knew what he wanted, this hedgehog, and it was just not anybody he wanted to marry. He had set his mind on the king's daughter. The old man and the old woman laughed, but he begged his father. "Please," he said, "go and be a matchmaker and ask for the prince's hand on my behalf." The father shook his head gravely, but he loved his son. It had been many years, and the hedgehog hadn't let him down. He had helped them both in an hour of need. And the man, even though he knew he would look like a fool, he decided he needed to try and ask for the hand of the princess to marry his son, the hedgehog. He went to beg the king with sweet words that he had been practicing all the way up to the palace. "Won't you let your daughter marry my Prickly, your majesty?" And the king looked at the old man up and down. "Bring him here and we'll see," replied the king. The old man came home and told the hedgehog Prickly all about it. And Prickly turned it over in his mind and said, "The king was right to ask to see me. Let's go to him." And so the old man, he found the best silk ribbon that they had in the house. And when his wife used to wear it upon her hair once upon a time, when her hair was long and smooth and beautiful. So that particular ribbon they put around the hedgehog, they stuck a white clover on it. And the old man put the hedgehog in his cap and brought him to the king. The king took one look at him and roared in laughter, almost falling from his throne. He laughed so hard that as he laughed, his whole beard shook. "A fine bridegroom you've brought me," cried the king. But the old man, Instead of going red and retreating, he began to praise the hedgehog. "He's very clever, my son. He's very hardworking. You'll see, you will not regret your decision." "Very well," said the king. "I'll let him have my daughter in marriage. If he cleans my cow house with all the dung that has piled up there for the past 5 years, if he strews it over the field, ploughs 300 tithes of land, grows the wheat and reaps it, threshes it, grinds the grain, and then bakes pies out of it for the whole of flour and brings them to me, and then and only then will I let my daughter marry the hedgehog." Now you'd think that the king would ask his daughter if she wanted to marry the hedgehog. But of course this was not the case. His daughter had no say about who she would marry, where she would go. She was a piece in a chess set, and she did not maneuver her moves. It was the king that did. And so the king decided where to put his daughter for the future of the kingdom. She had no voice in this. The king spoke for her. The old man spoke to the hedgehog, his son, and his heart was filled with sorrow. "Well, don't worry," said the hedgehog. "Don't grieve, father. I'll try to cope with the work somehow. It'll only take me to the king's cow house. Just take me there and I'll do the rest." And so the old man brought the hedgehog in his cap, and the hedgehog cried, "Come, dung, get into the wagons and make off for the field." And the dung, it loaded itself into the wagons and rode off for the field. The hedgehog began running up and down the unploughed field. "Come, field," he shouted, "plough yourself." And the field ploughed itself. "Come, field, harrow yourself." And the field was harrowed. "Lie straight as strings," furrowed, and there were the furrows stretched across the field as straight as strings. "Drop into the earth, grain." And the grains of wheat dropped themselves into the furrows and burrowed themselves so softly into the dark, deep earth. "Come and ripen wheat." And at once the wheat ripened, beautiful, golden, and now be cut and gathered into sheaves. And the wheat gathered itself into sheaves. "Dry the grain, sun." And even the sun listened and dried the grain. "Lie down on the threshing floor, ears of wheat." And the ears of wheat lay down, be threshed and ground to flour grain, and the grain threshed and ground to flour itself. "Bake yourselves pies, and then climb into the wagons and ride off to the king's palace." And this happened too. The pies baked themselves, climbed into the wagons, and rode off into the palace. 100 wagons loads they made up in all, and the hedgehog rolled ahead of them in a little bowl, rolling and rolling, pointing out the way. All this took less than the sunrise and the sunset. Magic. The hedgehog, it seemed, had the power over everything. The king's eyes bulged. His heart began to beat quick. Everything he had asked for, the hedgehog had done. The king had an audience when he promised. He had promised, and the king's word was more worth to him than his own daughter. And so he had to agree. He could not go back on his word. So he summoned his daughter. Did even bother looking into her eyes and showed her her new bridegroom. "Go and get ready for the wedding," said the king. And the girl went as pale as wax. She could not disobey her father. She had no right. She had no choice. She had no agency. She had no legal rights. Her own mind was not her own. Her own body was not her own. Her own heart was not her own. Yes, she had silver, she had gold, but all of it was meaningless, for she did not belong to herself. No woman did. And so she began to get ready for the wedding. Late at night, after the wedding feast had finished, there was much dancing and much merriment and much drinking, and the princess, well, she had learned how to look like she was happy, but inside she was breaking. It was the wedding night. It was dark. All the candles were snuffed. The hedgehog got into bed, but before he got into bed, he cast off his skin for the very first time in a long time. He hid it behind the stove, and underneath his skin, he was a handsome young man. And in the darkness, the princess touched, and where she thought she would feel prickles, she felt smooth skin. And that night together they went exploring. They explored caves and valleys, mountains and meadows. The princess, well, it could have been much worse. In the morning she smiled to herself. The hedgehog had been kind and gentle. And as far as wedding nights go, it was not as bad as it could have been. She had been told. The hedgehog, though, was not such a smooth talker. He was a hard worker, but the language of love he hadn't learned very well. And so they didn't talk very much. He just left the princess to be by herself. He carried on doing hedgehog things. Every morning, after a night in the darkness, after shedding his hedgehog skin and prickles, he went back behind the stove. And at daybreak he went back into his prickly skin and began scurrying around from one chamber to another, snorting and sniffling as he did. But as soon as darkness set, he cast off his needles and turned into a handsome young man once again. And so it was, day after night, night after day, on and on. Months passed. Moons came round and a slither back again. They aged and they become young, moon after moon. One particular morning, the king's servant came in to clean the chambers and found the hedgehog skin behind the stove. He didn't think anything of it. He just took it, looked at it, and didn't even bother to use his brain and threw it in the fire. And it crackled, and it burned, and everything changed. The young man got out of bed, stretched, and looked for his hedgehog skin behind the stove, but it was not. He shook his head. He blamed his wife. He did not even bother to ask, not even bother to talk. He just blamed his wife. A magician, he said, turned me into a hedgehog. Now I must go beyond the seas and you won't see me for 7 years. And if you touch anything, the hedgehog that had lost his skin said to his young wife, whatever you touch will turn into iron. And he left. The young woman was speechless. She wept, not knowing what had happened. How can a marriage fail? What would she say to her father, to her mother? What would happen to the kingdom? But she wasn't to blame. She hadn't done anything, and this curse that was put upon her, and as she wept, she went to move her tears, to wipe her face, and upon touching her own face, it turned into iron. She went to move her legs and touch them, and they turned into iron. She felt her chest, and it turned into iron. The whole woman was turned into iron by her own fingers. But it was not her fault. She suffered a cruel fate. She cursed. She moved her feet with such difficulty. She walked straight to the house of the old broom maker, the hedgehog's father. It took her a long time to get there. Moving feet made of iron is not an easy feat. She went to ask him, is there anything that she could do? She was fated to die bound in iron. This is not what she imagined her life to look like. The old man shook his head. He took pity on his daughter-in-law. He made ready to set off beyond the seas to look for his son. He felt bad, and if there was anything he could do to help, he would. He had asked for the princess' hand in marriage after all. He walked for a long time, across meadows and mountains, across bogs and burns. Seasons passed, not for 1 year, not even for 2, but for many a year the old man walked. He walked for such a long way, for such a long time, that when he arrived finally by the sea, he was like an old tree stump overgrown with moss. There was moss on his feet, on his legs, on his arms, on his beard, on his face. He finally came to the shore of the sea and called out to his son, "Come out, my son, come out, swim over to me." And the hedgehog that was in a human form now, turned into white sea foam, and as a wave he came on over to the shore and said, "Why are you here, father? Could you not leave me in peace? What do you want from me?" And the father told his son of his young wife's sufferings. Prickly listened to him. "Why do you speak on her behalf? Let her come here herself. Let her use her own voice. Let her speak herself." His father nodded. It's a long way. By the time he went back home, many more years had passed. He had turned into an old and feeble man, hardly carrying his own 2 legs. He needed the help of a stick to walk. With a heavy heart, he told his daughter-in-law what she had to do. Bound in iron as she was, now rusty in some places, she set on her way, one heavy foot upon another. She dragged herself with great difficulty. Every step put sweat upon her brow, but still she walked. She would not accept this as her fate. Another year went by, and another. Through moss she walked, through dunes and dales she moved, through bramble and bracken still she walked, slow but steady. For every journey begins with a single step, and that's all you can do sometimes. Put one foot in front of another. Keep on going. The path shows itself, but you have to make the first move, otherwise you're stuck in the darkness, bound in iron. And that she did have. She had courage. She moved. Like her father-in-law before her, she too was all grown with moths by the time she reached. She stood there, and she waited by the shore. She called to her husband, who turned into white foam, floated out into her through a wave, and said finally, "Listen, listen to me. When evening comes, you will see white foam by the very shore, and red foam just beyond. Wait until the half moon appears in the sky, and then scoop up the handful of the white foam." And the woman nodded. With those words, the man vanished into the deep, into the amber sea. And the wife waited. She waited, looking at the horizon. She waited, looking at the sun set and make the heavens hues of pink and orange. She waited as the half moon came up. The half moon, always forgotten, not quite full, not quite a crescent, but there is a power in her. The half moon watched as the woman did what she was told. She scooped up a handful of white foam, and there before her stood her husband, tall and handsome youth. He was as handsome as she remembered him to be. Her heart beat quick. She was moved by the sight of him. She remembered the happy times that they had. They were not perfect. What early days of a marriage are, with two people that hardly knew each other, and two people that hardly spoke, two people that only had the darkness and privacy. But there was more that she had to do. "We must swim across the sea," he said to her. "Are you afraid, my wife?" "No," she replied. "I am not afraid," she said. "Then put your arms around my neck and hold on tight," he said. She put her arms around his neck, and they swam across the deep sea. "Now we must pass through a flame," declared he. "Some dragons have made a fire as hot as the sun. Are you afraid, my wife?" "No." "I am not afraid," said she. "Then put your arms around my waist and hold tight," and she did. And I passed through the dancing flames unscathed, unburned. "Do you see that old oak tree?" he said. And there in front of them was an oak tree, gnarly, hollow, as old as life itself it looked. "As soon as we reach it, there is some magic there. And know that you will be turned into toads. Are you prepared to live as a toad next to me, who will also be a toad for 2 years, and spend 2 years under a porch?" "I am ready," the princess said. "Are you afraid?" said the young man. "I am not afraid," said the young woman. And then they went through the gnarly, hollow oak tree, and then they were turned into toads by old magic, and the princess and her husband lived under the porch for 2 whole years as a toads. The two of them. They learned much about scurrying under leaves. He knew something about that already. A different life, a different power, a different language was spoken. They learned much about themselves during those years. They laughed. They had no one else to rely upon them. It was like the beginning of their marriage. The first days, they were happy. 2 years passed quite quickly. And after that, on one particular day, when the moon was full, they felt tingling in their Their frog limbs, they felt tingling upon their skin. They began to feel hot rather than cold, and dry rather than wet. Then it started to burn, and it started to stretch, and they cried out in pain, and as they looked upon their limbs, they shifted. Where webbed feet were, now were legs, and where 4 feet were, now they had arms. Where they had warts, they had smooth skin, they had hair. They stretched upwards and felt they could reach the clouds for the very first time. They weren't hunched over, they looked at one another. They were there as naked as the first day they were born. They laughed. It was the beginning of something new yet again. It didn't take them quite as long to travel back home. But travel back home they did, and this time it was different. This time they were equal. This time they had gone through many a change together and separately. They had shifted. They had learned much about each other and one another. They had lived as individuals, and they had lived as husband and wife. They had been humans and toads and humans again. They came home. The hedgehog, for he once was a hedgehog but no more, went to his father who breathed so shallowly on the bed. He hugged him. "You can go in peace now," he said. "You can go in peace. Thank you for everything you've done." And the old man breathed a last sigh and joined his wife who had departed a few months before. And the princess, well, she turned back into the kingdom to greet her own parents, to have their blessing, to hug her mother. And then there was a feast, a proper wedding feast, where the princess no longer had to pretend to be happy. She was happy. She no longer had to pretend to dance, she wanted to dance. She no longer had to pretend that she was in love for the sake of her kingdom. Her heart beat, and she listened to its heartbeat, and she knew it was true. She was happy. She had been on a long journey, and she deserved every single day of happiness that followed. And for when the dark days came, for she knew they would, both her and her husband knew that they could travel together. They knew they could rely on each other, but more than that, she knew that she could rely on herself. She had what it took to meet good days and bad. And she looked forward to smiling at the moon, remembering those days of sea foams. She looked forward to welcoming sunrises and sunsets. Breathed in the spring and sighed out the autumn, and was glad that that drum she had inside her chest beat true, and she was able to listen and live well. The hedgehog appears in many stories across the Baltic and Eastern European countries. There is a Lithuanian and Latvian creation story where the creator made the heaven and the earth, but he made a mistake and did not take good measurements. And so the earth was made larger than the heaven. Well, that of course wasn't going to do, and so on the hedgehog's wide suggestion, the creator squeezed the earth so that it would fit into the heaven. And that shrinking, the squeezing of the earth, was how the mountains were made. And to reward the hedgehog, the creator gave him needles. There's a Bulgarian story which some of you may have heard me tell where the sun tries to marry the moon, and at the wedding feast, the hedgehog eats stones. Why do you eat stones? The sun asks him. Well, there was the only thing left to eat after you have children and the earth burns. And so the hedgehog is wise in many a story. And he is wise here as well. He has a great power to command the heavens, to command the sun, to command much. Maybe the two stories are related. It is because of his wisdom and because of the favor to shrink the earth that he has a command over it. We don't know. But another thing that the story is about is, of course, marriage, a relationship with another, with oneself. At a time where women didn't have a voice, didn't have a choice about who to marry, when to marry, if to marry. They just had to do it. And their father spoke for them. They did not have a voice of their own. And so when they meet hedgehog and princess, it is not the princess' choice. And the burning of the hedgehog's skin, that is not hedgehog's choice. And so they each lose some part of themselves. And they go on vast journeys that take a long time. But relationships take a long time. Then they each change from sea foam and iron to toads, back to themselves. This also reminds me of a story called The Tiger's Whisker, which is in this podcast, episode number 4, or sometimes it's a lion's whisker, where a woman has to go and collect a tiger's whisker and face her husband after the war. And maybe here at the hedgehog, his prickles, the way he is prickly and unapproachable, maybe he says something of a previous life. For we know that he has had a previous life, and when difficult things happen, when events happen that still impact upon us and that have been hurtful, one of the ways we do deal with them is build shells, build prickles, make ourselves unapproachable. And so that kind of unapproachable blanket, skin that one wears upon themselves, it makes sense that he would to blame his wife. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it just. But it is an explanation, perhaps. For he has lost a part of himself. And so the journey for him is to rediscover and make himself whole. And that requires travelling to the sea and going into an oak, taking all the elements with him that maybe have been lost. And then after, they come back together. And this is a really old story, but there's a lovely modern quote by a relationship therapist who many of you know, called Esther Perel. And she says most people are going to have 2 or 3 marriages or committed relationships in their adult life. Some of us will have them with the same person. And isn't that what the story says? There is an understanding that people have had for many years, many centuries, that those kind of relationships, they go through different lifetimes, different faces, different phases. They grow, they change. But with each change, there is a death. It is the life, death, life cycle. And this is what the story tells us. And also that a journey takes a single step. Journeys are hard. Many journeys feel like you're making them with an iron shoe, an iron boot, an iron body, slow and painful. And yet she carries on. She has the strength, the determination, the courage. And so with this story, I leave you for this month and wish you a wonderful rest of the summer. I hope that your journeys is not as difficult as being made with iron shoes and iron legs. But if they are, may you make them with courage, determination, and with a beat of your own heart loud inside you. See you soon. Thank you to In Feathers for this beautiful music. Thank you so much for joining me in the Story Apothecary. See you next month.